Welcome to tonight's Fireside Fridays with your host, Alona Minkowski.
This week, we've spoken at length about the National Defense Authorization Act, the appropriations bill that puts more than $600 billion more towards defense for the fiscal year of 2012. An amount in itself that deserves questioning, and yet never gets it as a bipartisan Congress passes that kind of massive spending calamity year in and year out. But what deserves to be highlighted even more this year in particular is, of course, a bill that codifies into law indefinite military detention, even making it legally justifiable in the cases of U.S. citizens. Now, there's a lot of nuance here, some vague and muddled legal language that's raised a lot of questions, things that we've discussed with various guests this week on the show. There's the executive branch's interpretation of the AUMF, the authorization of military force, which, well, essentially already allowed the president to have all of these powers, even the power to execute U.S. citizens abroad without due process, as we saw in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki. Or at least that's the way that the Obama administration has chosen to interpret that language. And now Congress is just reaffirming that, with a few changes here or there as to how much domestic law enforcement should handle versus the military. But I'm not going to get into all these details again at this moment. I want to take this time out to address specific concerns and arguments that we've seen out there. See, at the moment, the law is just waiting to be signed by the president. The veto threat that he originally issued, just a thing of the past. And thankfully, the overwhelming response to this indefinite detention language from human rights groups, to the New York Times editorial page, other publications, even many ardent Obama supporters, has been negative. And as it should be, this is just another erosion of our Constitution, of our civil liberties, of the rule of law that we supposedly uphold. Another massive expansion of the war on terror, which we apparently live in and will continue to live in every day. There's no end in sight. But what I've seen in so many cases is that many people think that the president caved on this one, gave in yet again. And I just don't think that's true. In fact, if we look at this president's record since the moment that he stepped into office, it's become very clear that civil liberties seem to be the last thing on this former constitutional law professor's mind. Now, we can start with Guantanamo Bay. It was a campaign promise to close the detention facility, and the president signed that executive order in his first days in office to close it within a year. And you know what? Maybe he didn't want Gitmo to close, but not for any of the reasons that people thought. Or better said, not for the reasons that anyone hoped. Maybe he wanted to get this black mark off of our record as a nation, to stop having a detention facility on an island in another country and a name that will always add fuel to the fire of America's enemies. A place now connected to the word torture. But that's about national embarrassment. That's about trying to move forward and not back, as this president likes to say. Get rid of it, and hopefully everybody out there might forget. It was never about human rights or the rule of law, in the sense of trying to bring justice to those people that we held, some of whom we tortured, many of whom never saw a court of law. And that was obvious from the get-go. See, this president first deemed 50 or so detainees untriable, as in, sorry, but we did things so bad to you that, now it's just too big of a mess for us to try and clean it up in court and still justify holding you. Then he signed a formal order for that indefinite detention. And when he tried to push Congress to allow for Gitmo detainees to be transferred to U.S. soil to a prison in Illinois, well, the indefinite detention part was still to stand. It was just about getting them to another prison, not bringing them any justice. So for those that say the president's hands were tied by Congress because they blocked the transfer of Gitmo detainees to U.S. soil, something that they reaffirmed, by the way, in this NDAA, well, it's only one part of it. They had nothing to do with what the president would have done with these untriables if they ever got to Illinois. Now, you've also heard me rant on about the president deciding that he has the power to kill an American citizen in another country without due process. A truly scary and insane amount of power that's been put in the hands of this one man. Now, this is also the same president that's used the state secrets privilege numerous times to shut people up or shut court cases down when it embarrassed the government. Because once again, embarrassment seems to hurt the president more than knowing that somebody has been denied fundamental human rights. This is the president whose Justice Department is fighting to erode the need for court warrants in certain situations, including allowing the feds to place GPS devices on your vehicle. This is the president who has had no problem going after whistleblowers, people that take risks to expose wrongdoing, fraud, waste, and abuse. He'd rather have them silenced and use charges of espionage to try and do it. So let me just get back to my central point here, is that those that feel that the president caved on this one, well, guess what? He didn't. If you examine his record and his actions as president, this could have been predicted and expected all along. He has no problem with indefinite detention, no matter what your citizenship, as long as his executive powers to choose are not curtailed. So for those that are disappointed in this president's decision and his record, because of the many promises that he made during the campaign trail to return to the rule of law, well, at first, I joined you. I was disappointed as well. I kept hoping that at some point he'll make a right move. He might redeem himself. But at this point, all of that hope is lost. Just be honest with yourselves. Don't expect this president to fulfill any of your hopes on a civil libertarian level, as an upholder of the Constitution, as somebody who values these human rights, because he doesn't. At this point, we need to stop being disappointed or shocked or thinking that the president caved. We need to stop hoping and praying that he'll change, because he won't. This is who he is, what his actions have shown him to be, and he deserves all and even more of the critique that comes to him.